Okay, I think we're starting now. So welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us for our regular monthly program of Toledo Naturalist Association. I'm Kim Smith. I'm TNA's Vice President and Program Chair, and I'm filling in for our President Barry McEwen tonight. And before we get to our featured speaker, I wanted to do a few brief announcements. I'll try to make them as brief as I can. The first is a note about pandemic programming. And while we think there's light at the end of the tunnel, we haven't yet decided when we're going to resume in-person meetings at Wildwood Metro Park. So the earliest we might do that is going to be September. And our field trips are still being run on a reservation-only basis for the spring and summer. So each field trip is limited to 10 people, and you need to email Jim Witter to get on a list for a field trip. So we normally don't have programs in the summer, and that's going to be the case this year too. So you can spend more time out in the field doing your nature studies. But we do have our annual birding competition, the North Coast Open, which is going to be May 14 and 15 this year. And the rules and everything have just been posted on our website, so please check that out. And if you want to participate in it, get in touch with Matt Kemp. And then our monthly programs are going to resume on August 19th. The speaker's not determined for that yet, so just watch your newsletter and the website and so on. So about field trips, the upcoming field trips, I think John's going to show you a list of them. Yeah, thank you. Let's see, the one on April 29th is an evening visit to Irwin Prairie, and unfortunately that one's already full. The May 1st trip to Swan Creek with Nate Kozicki, I'm not sure if that one has space, so check with Jim if you want to get on that one. And then I'm going to be leading 2 dragonfly trips at Wiregrass this year. The first one is going to be June 19th and the second is July 10th. And I think those, well, they do both have space on them. There are only a few people signed up at this point, so get your name in and save your spot there. Let's see, I think that's it for field trips for right now. I also wanted to thank John Dwyer, who's behind the scenes running our Zoom as usual and making everything easier for everybody here. So thanks, John. Okay, so now I want to just go ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight. We're going to have a program by Rebecca Lewis of Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge. And Rebecca is originally from Wisconsin, and she's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And she began her career as a co-op student with the Litchfield Wetland Management District in Minnesota. And then she was working at the Seney National Wildlife Refuge in Michigan, where she discovered her love of visitor services. And now she's been working at Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge for, I think this is going to be your 25th year, Rebecca, it looks like, since 1996, where she's currently the visitor services specialist for the refuge. So she says some of her favorite parts of that job are working with the federal junior duck stamp program and sharing her love of birds with visitors to the refuge, as well as working with their many volunteers. And when she's not working, Rebecca likes to go birding or traveling or spend time with her 2 teenagers or do volunteering like many of us do. So also Rebecca, sorry, there's a hair in my mouth from my cat who was bothering me. We're going to ask people to please type your questions in the chat box during the program, and Rebecca will answer them at the end. So Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. And if you're ready, why don't you go ahead? Go ahead with your program.
All right.
Thank you.
Are we seeing what we should be seeing?
Yes, looks like it.
All right. I love it when it works. So thank you for having me tonight. I know some of you know me. Some of you probably know my name. As we've learned, I've been here for quite a long time. I'm actually also celebrating my 30th year with the Fish and Wildlife Service this year, and I really don't know how it happened. It just seems like a couple years ago that I came on here. So my thought as I was putting this together was really to know some of the reason we do some of the things now really goes all the way back to the beginning. So that's where there we go. We're going to go. The refuge is 60 years old this year. It was started in 1961, and the property that was purchased was a system of hunt clubs and farms, and it was managed by a system of dikes and ditches. And you can see, you know, a ditch and then a dike. And if you've hiked any of the trails, if you've taken the wildlife drive, all of that is on the dikes that wind their way through the refuge. Some, if you recognize what's in this picture at all, some of what you're seeing aren't there anymore. The 1970s was pretty rough, pretty hard on the refuge, and a lot of dikes were just destroyed during that time. So if you've walked all the way out to the point on the hiking trails, that's right here, and this is the Crane Creek estuary, and none of those dikes are still there. So once it was refuge property, it was still managed as cropland and wetlands. And just like the hunt clubs have done for years, they would grow corn or soybeans and then cut some of the corn, all of the soybeans, flood some of the corn, and that would provide food for the ducks. Or if they were deeper areas, they were wetlands year round, and there wasn't any cropping or farming done in those. The hunting on the refuge was all goose hunting. It was only in fields, so it was dry cornfields or slightly flooded, and it was only for geese. So that's something that has changed, and it's almost no geese now because they're all water blinds. That seems a little backwards, but nobody really wants to go out and only hunt geese these days. And the refuge hunt is not open when it's only goose season. It's only open when there's duck season. And one of the rules in the hunt plan was that we could only have blinds on the perimeter of the refuge. We had to protect the interior of the refuge as a place for the ducks to sit and rest and build up that fuel that they need to continue their migration. One of the things that you'll notice on this map is it has way better names than we have on the refuge units now. And about 15 years ago, we put together our comprehensive conservation plan. And our biggest regret in putting that plan together is we did not give the units better names than 1, 2, 2A, 2B, 2C. If you look at some of our current maps, those are on there, and it's really boring, and it doesn't even make sense because they aren't even all in order. If you have ever heard my talk on the history of the refuge, here is Pintail Marsh. This is Metzger Marsh up here. Whoops. And this section of property is what started the refuge. It was up for development, and the state did not want it to be developed, and a lot of different organizations from the local area got together, and it was their development permit was denied. So that's how the refuge came to be. And you can see it's still quite recognizable as far as where some of the dikes are and some of the roads and different parts that travel. The biggest change is that the dikes that are around Crane Creek are no longer there. So we had goose hunting, and then we weren't the most people-friendly bunch. There was one program, and it was mostly involved Audubon groups. And I know John Gallagher and Audubon, Ohio, they came to the refuge a lot, and they would stay at the Butternut Lodge. And in exchange for some service work, maybe pulling some, cutting some brush or pulling weeds or something, they could stay in this lodge. They could then cross a bridge over onto the hiking trails, but there was also a trail that was accessed only by people who were staying in this lodge. It was a little benefit for the groups that were doing the service work. This lodge is no longer there. It was sinking into the marsh. And that's, as I said, there were some rough years, and that was a big program that kind of just tore through the refuge system and a lot of government properties. They got rid of all access buildings, and some of them needed to be. As I said, that one was sinking into the marsh, but the one that breaks my heart the most is the Cedar Point Hunt Club was burned down during that era of get rid of every extra building that you can. It was not built with the best materials. It was in pretty bad shape, but it was a lovely building in its day. And I'm kind of a lover of all things old, so I hated to see that they burned that one down. They also had a manager at the refuge who I knew him later, but I did not know him when he was at the refuge. And he, from what I've been told, would have gladly put a gate up at the highway and never let a person in the refuge. And he would close the hiking trails during waterfowl migration. And one of the most important pieces on this sign is that flushing ducks expend up to 12 times the energy used at rest. And it has been estimated that for every 10 minutes birds spend flying, they must forage for about 2 hours to replenish those energy reserves. And that's not incorrect. It's just not, we've found other ways to compensate for the flushing of birds. And we feel that the center of the refuge is enough, and the hiking trails need to be there for the people. I really found irony in the last line of the sign: enjoy your visit to Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge. Enjoy it, but don't bother our birds, is basically what this sign says. So then we moved into the 80s and 90s, and we saw big changes, not just me, but we had a big staff increase. We had 4 maintenance staff. And one of them was a man who retired from LOF in Toledo, and he was an amazing welder. He could build anything they needed. He helped do a lot of maintenance on the pump structures that were failing. He built covers to protect the motors. And one of the other men was the best heavy equipment operator that I've ever had the experience to watch work. And they did so much work just to improve the structures and the infrastructure of the refuge, the dikes and the pumps and the water control structures. And we also had 2 refuge operations specialists. Their job was management. They weren't, sorry. Spring is getting to me. They weren't managers in the respect that they supervised employees. They didn't have to deal with all of the bureaucracy. Their jobs were to manage habitat. And then we also had a biologist, and he did a fair amount of research, the one from the 90s, and then on up through the current time, really learning what the changes we make on the refuge do, how they affect the birds that are coming through. And it's just all combined to make the decisions that are made now even, I guess, more correct. We're always learning, so we will continue to make changes in things. So they did so much wetland restoration and improvement. A lot of those farm fields were no longer farm fields after this time. They stopped a lot of the farming. And the theory behind that, corn provides a great amount of food for the birds. But if the duck has to jump up and pull down a corn cob to get the food, it burns up as much energy as it gains from that. So what we prefer to do is have natural plants grow. They provide seeds right at water level. There's a lot of smart weeds and things. They're early successional plants. So a lot of what we're doing when we're managing wetlands is setting back succession. Normally a wetland would, slowly fill in. There would be more plants that would decay and become more dirt, and over time it could eventually become a forest. So we keep putting that back every few years. So we have those plants that are just there to fight for survival by putting out as many seeds as they possibly can. And those seeds provide water level food for the birds that are swimming in the wetland. And it's just far better than the farming. Another benefit of farming is you don't have as many invasive species and weeds and undesirable plants in that area, but you get that by using chemicals, and it's labor intensive, and the benefit isn't there. So we no longer have farming on the refuge unless it's a property that we've recently purchased. Sometimes there's a lease agreement with a farmer and they get to finish that out, or we don't have the time to start doing restoration on it, so we want to keep it in farming so it doesn't go to weeds. So those are the reasons that we still might have farming on refuge property. The wildlife drive was started. When I came on, it was open 2 days a year, the second Saturday in May. And then we started opening it during National Wildlife Refuge Week in October. And I think the peak during that time was we had more than 900 cars come through in one day. We used to stand at the entrance and hand a flyer to everyone who came in. And, it was a lot of people who didn't even care about, they didn't know what birds they were seeing. They wanted to see what we were hiding in here. They wanted to know what we'd done. There was a local landowner who would take every chance he could to come out and see when we have trapping previews. He would come for those too, because he wanted to see what was out here and gossip with everybody. And so it was a lot of fun, but it was very long days, and it was always hard. People would associate it with Mother's Day, and Mother's Day is not always the second, it's always the second Sunday. It's not always that same weekend as the second Saturday. And it was really hard when people made a mistake and they'd come for miles, and then they'd come on the wrong Saturday. So eventually we did move that to a weekend, and then it's gotten much better since then. Our hunt program was transitioned to water blinds, which means it wasn't as much on the perimeter, but it's still on the perimeter, and I'll show you a map of that later. And then we started the refuge deer hunt program in 1996. Now that was started, that biologist I mentioned who really did a lot of work, he worked hard to get that started. And the refuge itself held more deer than the entire Ottawa County together. We had so many deer on the refuge that most of the woodlots had no woody vegetation below 4 feet. That's called a browse line. And you could see that on every wooded area on the refuge. We were seeing deer, most of them were having triplets, which means at the time they were still very healthy, but we were heading into a real big problem. So they needed to lower that population. And right now the refuge deer population is right where it should be. There have always been invasive species, but we got hit hard at this time. Purple loosestrife, flowering rush, Phragmites. They also were, dealing with zebra mussels and gobies, and it really became a problem, and it stopped being, we manage just for what plants we want. We have to now consider invasive species. Every drawdown we do to expose that mud, get those early successional plants growing, every one of those, the timing is arranged around what the purple loosestrife will do, how it will react. What will the Phragmites do if we do this? If you burn Phragmites, it takes away all the brown stuff, but it just makes it angry. So you have to be ready to spray it with pesticide or flood it or take something else into account to make sure that you get rid of it and you don't just make it come back stronger. And in the 90s, our visitation to the refuge reached 100,000 people. And that was a really big deal. I couldn't tell you which year it was, but I remember when it happened. And we were all pretty excited and did the math a couple of times to make sure that we did it right. Sorry. No, I don't want you to read all of this. This slide is about the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act, and it's one of the best things, in my opinion, to happen to national wildlife refuges since they were started. There was no one law that said refuges are for this. Refuges should be doing that. And since we have regional offices, they could all kind of make up their own rules, and it was a very strange world to live and work in. So the two most exciting parts of that law was a requirement that the Secretary of the Interior maintain the biological integrity, diversity, and environmental health of the refuge system. Surprising that that wasn't already a rule. And the Fish and Wildlife Service has a scientific integrity officer. He makes sure, or she, it happened to be the most recent person in the position was a man, and he was actually stationed here at Ottawa. He wanted to work in Ohio, and he can work anywhere. So he came and worked at the refuge for a while. And the other one is a recognition that wildlife-dependent recreational uses involving hunting, fishing, wildlife observation and photography, and environmental education and interpretation, when it's compatible, are legitimate and appropriate public uses of the refuge system. So we will talk about our priority public uses a lot when we're making decisions. And on all of our refuge properties that are open to the public, those 6 uses, sorry, they are not all compatible with hunting, but the others are. So we are currently, and I have a map at the end, we're currently purchasing property, and most of those new properties are open to the public, which means public hunting, but it also means you can go there and observe wildlife. We were a little nervous about that. It's not something we're used to doing, but we went for it. So why are we not always feeling the love from people? I mean, we're doing everything we can to open up the refuge and bring people in. Well, a lot of people still remember that their parents' or grandparents' property was taken from them to start the refuge. Most of the property was not taken by eminent domain. The original property that created the refuge, that started the whole thing, was, and that was a long, years-long, drawn-out court case. But I had a program. It was a group of ladies from a local church, and they came out and they had a dinner, and then we went and took a tour of the refuge. And this one woman was just scowling at me. I'm like, what did I do wrong? And on the tour, she kind of said a few things. Oh, I remember, coming to the end of this road. And I'm just like, this hasn't been a road worthy to drive on in a long time. And it turned out that her parents had a farm north between Vila Road and Metzger Marsh. And her brother built one of the houses that's on Vila Road. And they refused to sell. And then her father passed away and the farm flooded. And she, to this day, thinks that the refuge staff did something to make the farm flood. And so then her mom was just done, and she sold to the refuge. Now, during the 70s, there was very high water. It was similar to what we were seeing the last couple of years. But I don't know. I don't know the people who lived here and worked there then, and I can't say they did, but I can't say they didn't. So there was a lot of animosity there, and those people are still around, and they have long memories, and I don't blame them. So there's that little issue. And then people want more access to the refuge. We've made changes in the last 20 to 30 years. We've opened a lot more. We've improved roads, we've added them to the wildlife drive. But I was accused once of hiding shorebirds in the back of the refuge. We do try to have habitat for shorebirds somewhere every year. The last couple of years with the high water was hard, but we try, and sometimes it's not where people can see it. So they do usually say, well, we're going to have this one and we're going to have that one, and then this will be the one where the public. And sometimes it doesn't work. We plan on some rain, typical spring, and then we get no rain. So we try. We really do try. We've started doing more tours, and if we don't have birds in places where people can see them, then we would try to open things up, and we do some guided tours. Hunters, they want more ducks. They do not shoot the number of birds on the refuge that they did 20 years ago. And these marshes just don't bring in the birds like the flooded corn does. But what they do is provide a healthier, it gives them more sustenance and better habitat. It's quality habitat. So they're not there. So the hunters aren't happy. The hunt club managers in the area aren't happy, because if the refuge is bringing in a lot of ducks, then they'll have more ducks on their property. And if they're a hunt club manager, they're being paid by their members to have the right habitat to bring the ducks in. There's always going to be political confusion. I had to go up to Cedar Point today, the Cedar Point National Wildlife Refuge. Toledo Edison installed a new Osprey platform, and they put out a press release about it. And so I had a few different news channels come out, and they wanted to get some pictures and things. And we're standing on this dike, and Lake Erie's behind us. The refuge is in front of us, but just on the other side of the dike is Mallard Club Wildlife Area, which is Division of Wildlife, and then the tree line off to our right was Maumee Bay State Park. And it, you know, anywhere on the refuge, you could point to a property that's not ours. So, you know, if there's no one at the boardwalk, and the bathrooms are a mess, they're going to come tell us that we have terrible bathrooms, or no bathrooms, or whatever the complaint is. So sometimes it's just that it's really hard to figure out where you are and whose property you're on. And I'm sure other people get complaints about us too. And then there's a lot of, you know, why don't we get what they get? We have to close. We close the refuge for hunting, sort of. We definitely close it for hunting, but we close it for longer than that. The Wildlife Drive is not open October and November. But that's more because it's the peak migration. Then there's also there's hunting, but it's not all the same days. I know that doesn't make sense. We close it a little more than we would need to for hunting, I guess would be a good way to say it. And that's just because we don't want to be moving all those birds. It's the peak time. They need to have that rest. The 2 times today that I went into Cedar Point, I felt sincere guilt because so many ducks were getting up and moving. And it wasn't even, you know, the speed. I tried going slower. Wouldn't have minded seeing them, but I couldn't even get anywhere close to these flocks of birds. And, you know, it's like as soon as they saw the movement, they were getting up and moving. So we just need to do that. There's also an interesting dynamic, I guess, within our staff. As hunting has changed through the years, it's a lot less hands-on. So we've found ways to streamline the hunt program. We no longer feel obligated to take each of the hunters to their blind and point out where they need to go. And some of the staff feels that, you know, we're finding more ways to not deal with hunters, and yet we're bringing staff in from other refuges, and, you know, tripling our staff in the spring to provide programs for birders. So there's a little, I'm not going to say animosity. There's a little concern within our staff that we aren't putting the effort into the hunting crowd that we put into the wildlife observation crowd. I would prefer to put all of that into, I'd like to have that size staff year round, and then we could really do some great programs, but that's a dream. So I think we've made some really outstanding changes in the last 20 or so years. When I say management, I mean the actual managers. We have had some outstanding managers here at the refuge, the big boss. The last 4 have been birders. They have been people. They've liked to bring people to the refuge. They've enjoyed, you know, taking people on tours. They want to show people the refuge. They want the more people to know about it that can. They have been outstanding, and that has gone a long way to just the overall attitude about the refuge and from the refuge. We've added a lot of visitor opportunities. A lot of that comes from our friends group. If any of you have taken a tour on our bus, that was purchased by our friends group. I think, oh gosh, I can't even list all of the outstanding things that they have done. They help with more volunteers. They pay interns to work at the refuge. managers have, each one has added a little bit more to the wildlife drive, more days. This year, the plan is for 61 days. I was gonna say, except we had to cancel February, but then we added one in. So maybe we're gonna keep our 61. The weather can really do crazy things to us. We have 10 full-time staff, and 2 of those are visitor services. It was just about around 2007 when the visitor center opened that we added a second visitor services staff person. So it's just been one person whose full-time job was to manage all of the people parts of the refuge. And we're also adding property to the refuge. We're now up to 10,500 acres. And with what I'm going to show you next, that might seem counterintuitive. Oh, must be the next after this. So I said we did, when we moved to water blinds with the hunting, they did move in a little bit. Whereas the blinds would have been in the field down here, now they're up there in a wetland, and they've moved in a little bit, but it still leaves that center part of the refuge as a place for the birds to stay and not be disturbed when they're migrating. Now, another reason that we don't want to disturb them in the fall is Metzger Marsh Wildlife Area up here. McGee has a controlled hunt, as do we. So they have hunting on the same days we do. They start earlier and end later, but it's more limited. Metzger Marsh is wide open to the public. So if we have cars traveling through here, it can be real easy to spook birds and have them go over into the public hunting area. And we don't want those hunters to have a bad day, but we don't want to help them either. We're here to provide the space for these birds. Okay, so every December we get together as a staff and we have a planning meeting for the next year. And in December 2019, our biologist hit us with this. And on Ottawa Refuge, we have 3,555 acres of managed wetlands. And the colors show you what their current status is as far as if it's in good condition, all the way down to failed. And we had a lot more failed than we thought we did. But the reason that this is happening, and it's all happening at once, is back in the 70s and 80s when we had those outstanding staff, we got funding in, and they did a lot of improvements. They replaced water control structures. And they built dikes and they improved things, and now they're old. And they're starting to fail and they've rusted out. And it seems everything is going bad at once. So some of that was pretty hard to take. And luckily there's been some good news on all of this. He wrote this part up, that these projects would be funded as deferred maintenance projects. Each refuge gets its budget for salaries, and then a little bit added on for this and a little bit added on for that. And then there's this pot of money that goes to deferred maintenance. But there are so many deferred maintenance projects across the service that we just weren't getting any. That's changed. I don't know if any of you saw, but we just recently advertised 3 positions. They are a 4-year term, and they will spend half of the year traveling to other refuges to work on their deferred maintenance projects. But the other 26 weeks of the year, they will be at the refuge working on deferred maintenance here. And there were 3 refuges in our region, which is Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Missouri. And 3 refuges in that region got these 3 employees for 4 years. So we're very excited that this is happening and that we will be able to stop these failures while they're still, you know, in intermediate or compromised. Now, we also have other ways that we can get some projects done. And this one right here it's a huge wetland. If you are familiar with the Wildlife Drive, you cross the bridge over Crane Creek. Here's the big pump, which has failed. You turn to the right, and then you turn to the left. And this is that really nice road that we built, and then a bald eagle built over the top of it. Well, with the high water, it did some damage to the backside, and then these structures all failed, or this one failed and this one was about to. So the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and the Ottawa Soil and Water Conservation District put together a project, and they got funding, and it has to be completed by July. So that means both of these roads, both dikes, have to be torn up and structures replaced before July. And we just found out who got the bid a few weeks ago. So we have April, May, and June to do this massive project. So if you were on the last Wildlife Drive, you probably saw that this was pretty low and they pumped it down, and it's right now, we're not pumping it anymore because we want to keep some shallow water on it to keep the mud wet for shorebirds. So Ron and I had a really long discussion, and we're like, what are we going to do? Because if they're doing construction here, they will be back and forth. So that means Vila Road is shut down. No Wildlife Drive on Vila Road. We can't, number one, there's a bald eagle's nest, so we can't run the Wildlife Drive here around the loop. We couldn't anyway because that structure will be under construction, and there won't be a road to drive on. And right here is the best warbler watching spot on the refuge most springs. So we were heartbroken, but yet we're excited because this is getting fixed. Nobody wanted to be the person to make the decision. But the company just put out their schedule, and we are going to be able to keep Vila Road open, and we'll be able to loop it around there through May 17th, I think. Whatever that last date is that it's open for a couple of weeks in May. I think it's through May 16th, and then they will start on that on the 17th. So that was such a relief because, you know, you want to fix this. You want this project to happen. We're so excited that it's going to happen and this huge wetland will be restored. But the timing is, it couldn't have been worse. So those are the kind of decisions we make and the conversations that we have. You know, we want people to see this, and we want to share it. So it also is a little confusing that we're purchasing property when we clearly are struggling to keep it up, but it's just because it's a situation of buy it now or it's going to be gone. It's going to have houses on it. It's, you know, nobody's putting more land into farming. So if it becomes available, and we do have small pots of money and things available, so we will purchase things. And as we do that, we are opening them up to the public. And there's some down here that are south of the Portage River, and then there's a few scattered around. It's really complicated for us even to keep track because we've added quite a few. we've opened them all up at once, but not all of them. And there's this one over here, which is not open. It is kind of sorry, it's this one. It's kind of complicated to get into, and it just doesn't have the infrastructure to allow traffic to go into it. We've taken a few birding groups there. That's where our first osprey nesting platform was installed in Ottawa County. And so that one is not, but this one is open. This one is fully open. This one isn't yet because we have no way to provide any parking. So that's a lot of what falls behind, comes behind a decision like that. Just what we have there, how we can get people in. We bought an amazing property and planned on fully opening it to the public as much as we could. It does have a great blue heron rookery on it, so that part would have had to be off limits. Well, access to the property is through an easement through another landowner's property, and that landowner is a hunt club, and they were not happy. They did not want public hunting next to their property. They certainly didn't want all that traffic of a public property, going through their property. So we were not able to open that one to the public, but we do occasionally, well, we try to take groups there. The one year we had a bunch planned, the road flooded, so we couldn't even get to it, but we try. And there's a lot of, there's always questions, and I love to answer people's questions because I don't like there to be misinformation. Cedar, there's multiple reasons why Cedar Point is not open to the public. The main one is it was donated to the refuge, and it's in the deed that we cannot put any, there cannot be any structures that are built for the public. So it can't be a park. It can't have picnic tables and things like that. So we do open a fishing access, and we have a little gravel launch for just paddle craft to go in, but it doesn't matter if you're a birder or a photographer or, if you're fishing from the kayak or not. There's no requirement. It's still called the fishing access because that's what it's always been called. But we really broadened the use of that one, and it's opening May 1st this year. We had gotten approval a number of years ago to open it earlier, but there were some holdups in the actual opening. We had to go through a longer process to get that to happen. And that's all I have for that, but if I can pull it back up if I need to answer any questions.
Oh yeah, can you hear me now, Rebecca?
Yes.
Yeah, I was trying to collect the questions as we went through. First of all, I wanted to say I knew this was going to be interesting, and I really have a new appreciation for the difficulty of your job. So thank you very much for doing that. Let's see, the first question that I found earlier, and I think this was in reference to a map you had up at the beginning. Tony asked, what does MS stand for? MS3 and 5 and so on.
Mm-hmm. That is moist soil. It's a type of management. We have pools, which are deeper, and it's considered a more permanent wetland. We still occasionally drain a pool if we need to do something for management. But moist soil is a management technique where we drain it, we expose the mud, those early successional plants come in and grow all of that good duck food. And typically those are drained every 3 years or so.
Okay, great. The next one was from Ken. Hi, Ken. And he said that you mentioned there were 900 cars a day back when the auto drive first opened, and he wants to know now how many are going through there, let's say during peak bird migration on a day.
Oh my goodness. It's a little bit self-regulating because once it gets so busy, people just stop going on it. But 2,000 isn't unusual for a good busy day.
Wow.
We had 56,394 go through in 2020.
That's almost incomprehensible.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
and I forgot. So I said we were so excited when we hit 100,000 people in the late 90s. Last year, we had 359,000 people come through the refuge.
Wow. That's not just the auto drive, that's just visitors walking through and everything.
Yes.
How do you keep track of who comes in and parks and just walks the trails? How do you track that?
It's a little creepy. We have car counters, so we count all of the cars, and then we periodically have volunteers. It's usually kids who have to do service hours, and they just, count heads in cars and then tally how many people do whatever. Are they carrying? Everybody has a camera now, so that one's gotten a little strange to try to count. But yeah, do they go off on a bicycle? Do they, go off on a jog or have binoculars?
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah,
that is a little creepy, but it's good to have that information. Okay.
But they don't do it often, so it's not, like every day somebody's counting how many people are doing whatever.
Oh, sort of maybe random days they just picked a count or something.
Yes, yeah, and then we use an average.
Okay. And then the next question was from Patty, she says, what property is the fishing access on?
The one that I was talking about at the end is the Cedar Point Refuge. It's at the end of Yandota Road, the very north end.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have a question? I'm not seeing any more in the chat. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Rebecca?
I don't think so. I hope I gave everybody a reason of how we try to balance and didn't sound like I was defending any one use.
Yeah, you have to walk a tightrope, don't you?
Yeah.
Well,
I really
go ahead.
I really like it when it goes back and forth on how many staff we have on whether or not I have to work on programs in the fall because I'm not a hunter. So I hate getting questions that I can't answer.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, well, if we're not seeing any more questions, so I think that we're just going to go ahead and conclude, and we're going to, we've recorded the program, and I think it was okay with you, right? We're going to post it on our website so people can watch this later. Oh, wait, Paul's asking a question. Hold on. Did I hear right that the shorebird area will be somewhat open, he says?
It will be, at least through mid-May.
Okay, there you go.
But it's Ottawa County.
Oh, there you go, Paul, Ottawa County. Okay. All right. So
no, I lied. It is Lucas County. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The line is on the south side.
For all you bird listers out there, pay attention to that. Okay. So we're going to end this. And thanks so much, Rebecca. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. Okay. See you all soon.